All right.
Hello, everybody. We'll give you a few seconds to finish logging in. It's great to see everybody. It's been a while. So here we all are again. I just want to make a few quick sort of housekeeping type notes. As I think you all probably saw already in the email notification or on the blog, we're going to switch to a monthly meeting schedule going forward. So we're kind of going back to our original schedule, our pre-pandemic schedule of meeting once per month. And it's probably going to be at 6:30 p.m. on the last Thursday of each month, I think. And we can adjust that. Look at the carpwithoutcars.org blog for more info on when exactly we'll be meeting. And hopefully, before too long, we'll be able to go back to doing a monthly outing as well, where we can kind of get out in the field together and look at birds. But for now, it's just going to be Zoom meetings. So hope everyone has had a good new year so far and has seen lots of cool birds. For today's meeting, we're going to be talking about Orioles, which we have talked about before. And in the description for the YouTube live stream of this meeting, and also in the blog post at Carp Without Cars about this meeting, I linked to that earlier discussion. This won't be exactly the same as that. We're going to be talking about just the Orioles. In that meeting, we talked about Orioles and tanagers. And we're going to be talking specifically about seeing them in the wintertime. So seeing them now, which is really kind of a different sort of thing to do than seeing them in the summertime when there's lots of them around, at least for the two species that we have a lot of. So that should be fun. And then the other big thing that's different about this time is that we have a very special guest. Paul Lehman is with us and has generously agreed to be pestered with questions as I satisfy my curiosity about all things related to winter Orioles in Santa Barbara County. Just to give you a brief idea, if you don't already know about Paul's bio, he is, well, he's a tour leader for Wings, which is where I'm reading this bio from. I'm going to skip some of it, though. He grew up in the suburbs of New York City, where he started birding at the age of 9. He later moved to California, where he lived for 20 years. He was a student at UC Santa Barbara and was a major player in the sort of birding revolution, the advancement of the activity of bird watching to a much more high-powered pursuit of rarities and studies of bird distribution in the 1970s and the 1980s. I believe, and I hope I'm not incorrect, that for many years, Paul, you organized the Santa Barbara Christmas bird count, or at least were a primary force in making that count.
Yeah, I was the compiler for about 15 years before Joan, and then I moved out of town and Joan took over.
Yeah, and I know you also taught, birding courses at Santa Barbara City College, because in Joan's recent book, The Story of a Santa Barbara Birder, she talks about, meeting you in these classes or attending your classes and all that she learned there. Let's see, but just continuing through your bio, he later moved back to the East Coast in 1994 to Cape May, New Jersey, and lived there until returning to Southern California in 2008. And these days you're down in San Diego, is my understanding, but you do come up during the Christmas counts, and you're here for the Santa Barbara count. And I know about it because in the run-ups to the count, it's like, oh, Paul Lehman went here, 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 and here and found this, and this. It's very exciting. Formerly a lecturer in geography and environmental studies at UC Santa Barbara, Paul has strong interests in the fields of weather, biogeography, and North American regional geography. Editor of Birding Magazine for 9 years. Also chief editor of several titles in the ABA Bird Finding Guide series. Associate editor for North American Birds Magazine, and a principal consultant on many popular field guides. And then in this bio, which I'm not sure how old it is, it says most recently as senior range map researcher and consultant for the new editions of the Peterson Field Guide, the Nat Geo Field Guide, the Smithsonian Guide, and the Sibley Guides, which, you know, anyone who's been part of our meetings in the past knows that I'm a huge fan of Sibley and his field guides. And so anyone who has contributed to that definitely has my gratitude in a large degree. So again, very exciting to have you here for the meeting, and I'm really looking forward to hearing what you can tell us about these Orioles we're going to be talking about. So before we jump in, any questions from anybody? Anything that we should discuss before we get started on Orioles? I guess I will sort of, most of you are familiar with this already, but I'll say, you know, please keep yourself muted when you're not speaking, because it helps avoid distractions. If you do have something you want to say, you can raise your hand, which Brody, I see you're doing. So yeah, you can also just unmute and talk. It's okay. We're not that formal. So yeah, Brody, what did you have that you wanted to share?
I just wanted to share a mandarin duck that I had. It's not a real one, but it's like a wood carving sort of, and the wings come off. And
you have an Oriole for your virtual background, so that's great. You're again thematically appropriate. I love your thematically appropriate background.
I was late this time. That's why I had my camera off. I was searching to get at first.
Well, we wouldn't start the meeting until you showed up, so it's good that you finally got here.
Yeah, and then one other thing that I wanted to show was this blue jay that I made out of Lego.
Wow, again, very impressive. You know, my history with Legos was back in the days when, you know, they just came in like 3 or 4 basic sizes, and they weren't as fancy as being able to make actual
they
birds.
didn't really have the all the instructions and stuff. With the ones that I do, there's all the instructions, and sometimes it'll take me 2 or 3 days to complete.
Well, that's an impressive creation. Thank you for sharing that. I see Kay, you're waving at the screen. Is that because you have something to say, or are you just waving to say hi? You're muted, so unless you unmute and say otherwise, I'll assume you're just saying hi. And in general, okay, that's great. And again, in general, feel free to just unmute and talk. We're not that formal, and it's easy for me to miss if somebody is waving at the screen. I can only see so many thumbnails at once, and if I'm looking at something else, I won't see it. There was one other brief announcement I wanted to make. Where do I have this? Apologies for being distracted. So, oh, right, Nancy Barron brought this up. The Great Backyard Bird Count is an event that is taking place the weekend of February 13th and 14th. And I guess it actually covers Friday through Monday, so the 12th through the 15th of February. And this is an event that's organized by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology and the Audubon Society and Birds Canada. And it's just, you know, a chance to encourage people to get out and see some birds and report what they're seeing. If you're already, you know, obsessively using eBird to report everything you see, just keep doing that and you'll be participating. But for those who haven't maybe taken the leap into submitting their findings via eBird, maybe this would be a good opportunity to go ahead and give a try of doing that. It's a fun sort of collective activity where we see how many birds we can find worldwide and be part of this event. So there's a link to that, again, in the description at the YouTube live stream and in the blog post at Carp Without Cars. Okay, so enough of all that. I did have a bunch of other questions I was hoping to ask Paul, but I'm just gonna, for the most part, I think bring those up as we're going through the Oriole presentation. But I did have one question I wanted to ask you maybe before we get started, which is, in your bio, it says you started bird watching, or you're interested in birds from the age of 9 in suburban New York. I'm curious if you can tell us anything about your sort of bird watching origin story beyond that. Was there a particular bird or a particular experience that got you started?
No. So I did not have that one wow bird experience that gets some people started. What I did is my parents bought me the Peterson Eastern Field Guide as a present. We had a bird feeder in the backyard, but they weren't birders. And I had, up till that point, been a stamp collector. So maybe it was that young male collecting instinct that I wanted to see all the birds that, that were in the book, etc. That's what probably got things going.
You know, it's interesting. I started off with the Peterson Western Field Guide too. And I think it is really interesting that your eventual interest in biogeography and contributing to field guide range maps, you know, that Peterson guide didn't really have range maps, right? Or it didn't have them on the facing page the way modern field guides do. And I remember, I think it was maybe the Golden Guide, or there was a field guide that came out a few years later that did have that. And it was just a huge thing to me as a young bird watcher. It really helped me kind of narrow down the list of possibilities. And I was still, you know, new and making lots of mistakes, but at least my mistakes were a little more geographically constrained than they had been once those range maps were there.
Right.
Were you interested in bird distribution, or is that something that really kind of just came on gradually as you
that more came on gradually, but I was already interested in that at about the same time I became a geography major at UCSB.
Oh, and you know, I didn't even mention it, but in your bio, the work you've done that's probably most helpful to me on a pretty much daily basis is your master's thesis at UCSB was the birds of Santa Barbara County, right? Your book that basically describes for each species what its occurrence is historically and current in Santa Barbara County, where you can find it. And then you've continued to update it. There was a gap, and then you revised it, and in recent years you've been updating it every year. Is that correct?
Yes. So, right, it was published in '94 by the Vertebrate Museum at UCSB. Then there was a break when I was back east, and then about the time I moved back here, I've now been updating it regularly. It's now 6 months since it was done, but I get the reports that Dave Compton compiles and use that plus eBird data plus other stuff people send me. I see Larry Ballard's in the group, and Larry's been incredibly helpful with botanical information and some bird stuff as well. So yeah, it's a continuing process. It'll never end.
Well, you know, as a person who's specifically interested in birding in Santa Barbara County, it's just a phenomenal resource to have. You know, when I'm bird watching in other counties where I don't have access to that kind of information, I really feel it's lack. I'm like, oh, wow, I really want to know, you know, does this species occur here, and how rare is this thing that I'm looking at? So that's, I'm a big fan, and I encourage everyone to check it out. You can download it for free. The link is in the usual places, and definitely check out the birds of Santa Barbara County. Okay, so anything else before we jump into Orioles? Going once, going twice.
Like a month ago, I saw a warbler. I know its name. I forgot it. It has like a little red thing like right by its breast. Yeah, it was a few little red marks. I forget what it's called, but yeah, I haven't ever seen one before. I think they're pretty rare.
And you saw this around here? Is that?
Yeah, I saw it at my house, Toro Canyon. Yeah.
Well, you've got enough birding expertise in this meeting. I'll bet you we can figure it out.
Yeah.
So you're sure it was a warbler?
Yes, either that or a redstart, which would be really, really
yeah.
rare.
Well, certainly, an American redstart would be a rarity, but it would have some sort of, dark orange kind of distributed around.
Yeah, that's sort of what I saw. It's sort of red, darkish orange. Yeah, if I might be able to look on it in my book. I'll say it late. Oh, maybe like once you're done with the slideshow or something, yeah. I'll say what it was.
Okay, well, give us an update when you research that more, because that would be really interesting. I'm going to go ahead then and share my screen, and let's see if I can set this up properly. And let's see if I've done this correctly. You should now be seeing my browser screen, which will just show a black box, which is not that interesting. Let's go here. So are you seeing winter Orioles?
Yes.
All right, well, let's go ahead and present. Okay, so let's talk about winter Orioles. So, I feel like I don't really need to justify talking about Orioles, because I just think they're amazing birds. They're just so spectacularly colorful and they're just gorgeous. And I always get excited when I see an Oriole. And but talking about winter Orioles is sort of interesting. Here's the histogram for eBird for Santa Barbara County. So we look at these in pretty much every meeting, but if you're new to these, what this has is there's a little green box representing each week in the year for each of these 5 Oriole species. And the thickness of the box in each week shows you the percentage of, the relative percentage of eBird lists submitted in that week in Santa Barbara County with that species. So the thicker the green line, the more of that bird is around at that time of year. And you can see from looking at this pretty quickly that, we have 2 Oriole species that we see a lot of, pretty much in the, period from March to September-ish. That's the hooded Oriole and the Bullock's Oriole. And then we have 3 other species that we see a whole lot less of, that are much harder to see and show up in a much smaller percentage of the eBird list. And that's the Orchard Oriole, the Baltimore Oriole, and the Scott's Oriole. And as you look at it, you kind of becomes clear after thinking it through that really winter is the time when you can see potentially all of them. In the middle of the summer, you've got those big 2 you can see, but the others are mostly not around. But the rarer ones, this is actually a pretty decent time to try and see them. And it's a different sort of challenge, to see these rarities because you're not out there, with dozens or hundreds of these birds out there in the landscape, and you're just sort of bird watching in the right habitat to see, when you happen to intersect with one. In this case, a lot of times there's a specific individual bird and there's just one of them to find. So if you can find it, that's great, but it's a different sort of challenge. It's, it's like a needle in a haystack kind of thing. You've got to know where the haystack is and how to look for the particular needle. But like a lot of things that are challenging, it has its rewards too. So that's what I'm going to talk about in this meeting, is sort of the challenging birding of trying to find these Orioles in wintertime. So I want to talk about their food sources. And this is something that Paul, you talk about in your book, in Birds of Santa Barbara County, that a lot of these species that normally winter to the south in Mexico or in the tropics, a few of them will stick around in Southern California because of these non-native plants that we have here, these ornamental plantings in the coastal part of Southern California that provide them the food they need. So, flowering eucalyptus trees are one example of a species we have locally that flowers in the wintertime. And if you can find, a big eucalyptus tree that's flowering in the winter, there's a good chance it will have a lot of birds in it that feed on nectar, and Orioles qualify. They'll use nectar, especially in the winter, to feed on, and if the food is there, they'll stick around if they happen to be there. So eucalyptus is one. Coral tree is another. And this is one that I see people talking about. I'm not aware of any coral trees that we have around Carpinteria, and I wish maybe we've got someone in the meeting who knows where to find them, closer to home. I know where there's some up in Santa Barbara.
There's some on Shepherd Mesa.
Really? Okay. So like up on that, if you walk around the loop up there?
No, below there.
Oh, on the road leading up.
On the right side going up, yeah.
Okay,
There's
cool.
some in Serena Park.
Okay.
Serena.
All right, cool. So very popular with Orioles. Bottlebrush, which is so the eucalyptus, most people know, comes from Australia. The coral tree, I think there's different species that come from various parts of the tropics around the world. And then the bottlebrush, I believe, also comes mostly from Australia. There's a lot of different varieties that we have in ornamental plantings. And then finally, Cape honeysuckle, which comes from I think the southern part of Africa. And again, very popular with Orioles, among other birds. So Paul, I presume there's lots of other plants that are good for winter Orioles, but am I missing any big ones here?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay. I didn't see that with your pictures. I can't see my mute or unmute anymore. No, these are absolutely the best. I would add that Orioles will visit a variety of other trees as well. So if you have, let's say, flowering eucalyptus, you'll watch them and then they'll go to a nearby sycamore or even like a sweet gum, liquid amber, and feed in the balls or in a sycamore. And then when willows start budding in late winter, they love feeding on the budding willows. So there are some non-blooming types that they'll go to as well. But these, you hit all the absolute classic ones here.
Yeah, and that does remind me, we're going to look in a little bit when we talk about some of the neat spots in Carpinteria for these Orioles, that in Santa Monica Creek, besides having a bunch of bottlebrush and flowering eucalyptus and Cape honeysuckle, there's also a big sycamore there. And I see the Orioles go in there a lot and sort of forage around in the leaves. Brody, I see you've got a hand up. Did you have a question?
Yes, the one that I saw was a yellow rumped warbler.
Ah, well, that is certainly a common species in the winter, and it's interesting. Like some of the ones, like the first year birds, are kind of drab, but others, the sort of adult birds, the adult males, they can look quite colorful and really impressive.
Yeah,
and actually, go ahead.
I saw the adult mare. I saw him twice. I saw one eating some dandelion seeds, and then another one came to our hummingbird feeder.
Excellent. And that reminds me. So another place you will see these wintering Orioles is hummingbird feeders, right? If it's the kind of feeder that gives them a big enough opening that they can get their beak in there, they'll visit those feeders as well. Oh. And about the yellow-rumped warblers, I was going to say that's a species that we don't really have in the summer. They winter here, and there's a lot of them wintering here typically. And so in these flowering eucalyptus trees, among other places, they will feed on the same nectar that the Orioles are. And it's actually a pretty useful way to get a quick idea of how much nectar there is in those trees. You can just listen for the chips of the yellow-rumped warblers, and it's sort of like a Geiger counter, or like the metal detector when you go down to the beach and you're sifting through the sand, you can start saying tick tick tick. You hear those chips of those warblers, and if you've got a half a dozen of them flying around in the canopy of a big eucalyptus, there's a good chance it's flowering, and there's going to be some other interesting species up there, so it's worth checking out. All right, I'm going to keep on going. And we'll start talking about some species. So I want to talk about this one. And, I often do this. I'd like to play a recording so you get used to the vocalizations, because that can be really helpful. These birds are bright and colorful, but they also kind of skulk around in the bushes. They're not necessarily always that obvious to, visually, or they'll be up in the top of a big tree. So if you can learn to recognize their vocalizations, it can be really helpful. So I'm going to play a call of this species, a typical call. And this is, all these recordings are from xenocanto.org, which is a great resource. And this is a recording by Matt Wistrand from there. So give me a thumbs up if you heard those calls. Okay, good. And then here's a song, a sort of longer, more musical vocalization. This one has a lot of noise because this is actually a recording I made with just my phone. So it's not really good audio equipment. And it was at this same location where this photo was, where I took this photo. This is this actual bird we're going to hear now.
Pretty complex song.
Yeah, it's very varied, and there's obviously a lot of traffic noise and some white-crowned sparrows and other stuff in there too. But this is the orchard oriole, and this is the adult male, and it's a pretty easy bird to identify because of this sort of unique color that has this sort of, I don't know, brick red. I'm not sure what I'm bad at color names. Whatever that color is, would be appropriately named. That's
sort of a rufus, maybe?
Yeah, it's kind of got a rufus going on. Again, I'm bad with the color names, but I know this color because if I see it in that Cape honeysuckle hedge, you can see he's in Cape honeysuckle. I'm like, I got the bird, because there's really nothing else in there that's that color.
Right.
So here's an idea of what the the female. So we got the female on the left and an immature male on the right. And here, if you don't have an adult male with a number of these Oriole species, you have a much more serious identification challenge. It's not impossible, but it's more work. You definitely need to pay attention to a lot more than just, oh, it has that color. And overall, I think the advice with the orchard Orioles is that structurally it's relatively small for an Oriole. It's one of the smaller ones. Its beak for an Oriole is relatively short and relatively straight. Some of the sort of similar Orioles have like the hooded Oriole. The first year male hooded Oriole actually looks a lot like this immature male orchard Oriole. But the orchard Oriole is a little bit shorter. Again, it's maybe an inch shorter than a hooded Oriole would be. The tail's a little shorter, the beak's a little straighter. I don't mean to gloss over these fine points, and certainly if you're seeing any of these Orioles in the wintertime, it's worth really paying attention to it and trying to document it if you can. If you make a recording of the voice, that's super helpful. If you can get a photograph, that's very helpful. But in the absence of that, really pay attention to just the details of its overall coloration and its overall structure, where the color appears on its body. We'll look at lots of examples of these.
John,
yeah.
The distinction between the female and the immature male as far as coloring is it only the black around the beak, or what other distinctive
well, I'd say that's, yeah, I mean, I'm not as expert as several of the people in this meeting, so I don't want to, monopolize the discussion. I don't know, Paul, would you like to maybe give a quick answer on maybe some of the things to look for in terms of non-male orchard Orioles, what you'd be looking for?
Yeah, I mean, they are average, smaller, little shorter tailed. The yellow tends to be sort of a clearer, true yellow, while on hooded, they tend to be a slightly dirtier, more olivey, mustard yellow. The backs on hoodeds tend to be a little grayer, but the problem is there's a lot of variation in orchards. Some are really bright yellow and some are a bit duller yellow. I know it's not winter, but the really big problem are juvenile hooded Orioles late summer and fall into at least late September, because they have shorter, straighter bills than the adults. And so we've had yellow Orioles, we just call them yellow Orioles, that we just throw our hands up after watching them for an hour and we give up. Although the typical young juvenile hoodeds, the base of the bill still has sort of a horn color or fleshy horn. So if you see that color at the base of the bill, not that blue-gray color you see on this photo, that means it's a young bird, and then you're really in trouble. But anyway, it's tough. And the answer is the young male orchards, it's just the black in the face and throat is really the only different from the female. Also, young males don't get the black until later in winter.
Right.
So early winter, they'll look like females. They won't have gotten the black yet.
Oh. I see, Andrea, you have your hand up. Did you have something to ask or add?
Yeah. This female has a black line through her eye, and she has sort of an eyebrow. Is that typical of just this one, or is that something that is not really distinguishing?
Again, I would defer to Paul.
Atypical. Typically, they're much plainer face, just sort of yellow with a dark eye. So that almost with the dark line through the eye and then have a yellow supercilium actually would make you almost think it's a female Bullock's Oriole, which are characters of a female Bullock. So no, that's not typical.
And we'll see examples of those in just a few minutes. And for me, a lot of times I take refuge in that New World Oriole species, the designation in eBird. Like I try not to get out over the tips of my skis too much. It's like if it's an adult male, I can feel pretty confident. If it's not, I try to take my time and be really cautious and maybe send around an email. If I can get photos, then I can call in experts and I have a much easier time of it. All right, I'm going to keep on moving. Oh, okay. So here is a range map. And, I actually had some second thoughts. So in putting these together, these presentations, I use photos that people have released with a Creative Commons license, and I try to credit them properly. In this case, I'm basically taking this range map from All About Birds, and I did not ask permission. So I especially with someone like Paul Lehman, who has worked on many, range maps, copyrighted range maps, I feel like maybe I'm on some thin ice here. But let me just make a brief plug for allaboutbirds.org. It's a great website, and you should visit it. It's from the same people who do eBird from the Cornell lab, and it's got wonderful range maps that I cannot resist, looking at. But here we basically have the Orchard Orioles range, and you can see that, based on this range map, at least, it really has no business being in Santa Barbara County. So when we get them in the fall and the winter months or the early spring, it's some sort of an oddity. They're vagrants, right? They're birds that have gone off in a different direction from the bulk of their species. And this is a really fascinating thing, and it kind of harkens back to that era I was talking about in the 70s and 80s when people like Guy McCaskey and Paul Lehman started running around to these migrant traps, these spots that tended to collect migrant birds, and finding Eastern rarities there, finding these ones and twos of these birds that really did not belong there according to the conventional wisdom. I'm curious, Paul, I realize it's a big subject, but do you have any insights to offer on just how it is that a bird like an orchard oriole ends up in Carpinteria in the winter?
Well, a lot of long distance migrants are in general are more prone, of course, to getting out of range than a short distance migrant. And orchard oriole certainly qualifies as a long distance migrant. There are a small number of orchards every winter in coastal California, and sometimes in the interior, Arizona, places like that. They're also turning up now much more regularly than previously thought up in Oregon, Washington, and Southwest British Columbia in fall and into early winter if they survive. So it's really interesting. There's been a big increase, and I think that's coverage is the issue up there. Why are orchard orioles so regular out here, given what you see on that range map as their regular range? I think one possibility is note that Western Mexico, not just Eastern Mexico, is a regular part of their winter range. So maybe there is a sort of southwesterly component to their migration. And if they just end up a little north of that, that can be coastal Southern California. Also, what's important is that coastal Southern California, Carpinteria, is the same distance for some orchard orioles than they should have if they were programmed to go to West Mexico. And so they stop instead of keep going and end up out in the Pacific Ocean, which unfortunately a lot of these vagrants end up doing. So anyway, that's probably why it's such a regular bird in very small numbers, despite what you see on the range map.
Cool. Oh, you know what? I actually wanted to click through. I had a link here because I wanted to share one of these abundance animations, because I just think these are the neatest thing. So I am sure you're very familiar with these already, but these, came out from the Cornell lab and the folks at eBird a few years ago. And, what it basically does is it takes, what I think of as the traditional range map, and it animates it, and it gives you relative abundance within the range. So you can really see week by week, where is the population going, and how, what proportion of the population, or at least roughly speaking, is going to one place versus another place. And, for example, looking at this version of their range, I realized that, in the static range map, the traditional range map we were looking at, and I'll stop it there, you see them as, they breed in this area, and it's kind of undifferentiated. But in this version of the range map, you see, there's actually a really, what looks like a significant concentration in this area, like Nebraska and Kansas and maybe Northeast Colorado, and maybe, a little denser population down here along the Gulf Coast. And I was really interested in asking you about this, Paul, because again, I know you've, studied and worked for a long time specifically in these sort of biogeographical questions. what do you think of these abundance maps and about, you know, using eBird data to produce this kind of visualization?
I think for core areas, they're fine. And for timing in core areas, I get nervous around the edges, especially if there's an identification issue. I get nervous about edges of Impidinax flycatcher maps, or if there was an overlap area of hooded and orchard orioles, such as Western Texas, I'd get nervous because of the problem with identifying females. But for core areas, etc., I think it's fine. And yeah, the visual aspect is really kind of cool.
Yeah, thanks. And I know you've actually touched on topics like that. Again, reading through Birds of Santa Barbara County, where you're talking about the history of orchard oriole occurrences in Santa Barbara County, that, you know, up to a certain point in time, they really weren't, you know, being reported. There aren't a lot of early records of it. And then there start being them. And if I'm paraphrasing, you know, correctly, what your sentiment was there, you talked about, well, there probably was a misidentification issue, that a lot of these, you know, first year male orchard orioles are maybe being misidentified as hooded orioles, or at least it's difficult to know in those early records, you know, is this the fact that we're getting some orchard orioles now, is that actually a change, or is that just that we're noticing them now?
You know, absolutely. The real increase in orchard orioles in the winter started probably the mid-late 1970s. And before that, there were plenty of hooded orioles being reported in the winter in the 60s. But I bet you that the conventional wisdom was, well, a yellow oriole, that's what I see in the summer, and I guess that's what's here in the winter. Orchard oriole, look at my field guide, they can't possibly be in California. Yeah. The same is true with female Baltimore orioles. A full adult male Baltimore oriole, people actually were finding in Santa Barbara already in the 1960s, but not a female, and they probably would have just passed it off as a bullock. You know, they thought it was a bullock's because that's what they would see the rest of the year. So conventional wisdom often sends you down the wrong road.
Yeah, it is very interesting. Just, you know, the more I learn about this stuff, the more I realize, oh, it's you know, it's more complicated than my mental model going in. And then I have to, you know, my mental model has to evolve to actually handle the complexity of what's actually out there. All right, I'm going to move on. And, oh, actually, yeah. So on the specific question of where do you go now if you want to see an orchard oriole in Santa Barbara County? So this is a screenshot of eBird's sightings map, and I've constrained it just for the current year. So this is just since, you know, January 1st, 2021. Where are there orchard oriole sightings in eBird? And there's really just one. And if I click through to the live version of this map, which will take a second to load, we can see that one location is basically down here in Carpinteria, and it is Santa Monica Creek. Oh, and that's nice. When I looked at this earlier today, my sighting from this morning had not been confirmed yet, so it wasn't showing up here, and now it has been confirmed. So thank you to the long-suffering and tireless eBird reviewer who did that, whichever one of you it was. But if I take a look, you know, at the photos I was lucky enough to get of this bird, you know, here's some shots of that orchard oriole in a, you know, pink flowering eucalyptus, doing his thing in there. And I guess to, you know, if people are not familiar with where exactly it is, I wanted to show briefly, go in and, you know, kind of zoom in Google Maps and kind of show you. So if you're in Carpinteria and you come up Santa Ynez Avenue, you're driving north along it, and you turn left on El Caro Lane, this road right here, you end up at this cul-de-sac. And if you park here and then walk out onto this bike path and turn left, so basically to go south, what you're doing is you're following the channelized course of Santa Monica Creek. And so looking south along there now, you walk up down along this bike path. There's a big sycamore here that you should definitely check for orioles in there. There's the big flowering eucalyptus here. That's where I actually took those photos of that orchard oriole, was in one of these trees. And then there is along the far bank, there's this Cape honeysuckle hedge that Oriole really likes. And in the last few months, it's actually been pruned pretty heavily. I think County Flood Control came along and just sort of shaved off the edge of this hedge to line up with the side of the creek channel. So it's not as extensive as it was, but it was in that hedge that I saw that presumably that same male orchard oriole this morning. So it still uses that hedge, and it's worth looking for it in there. All right, so I mean, you can also just go out and look for other orchard orioles that I'm sure are out there somewhere, a few of them. But if you want to increase your odds, you can go look for this one that's actually known to be there and see if you can find it.
John,
Rob,
do you
yeah.
usually find them alone, or are they in pairs? I mean, when you've been seeing this one Oriole, it's just one, is that correct?
Well, we're going to talk about other species. And in fact, that when I took those photos we were just looking at, where it's up there in the pink flowering eucalyptus, there was a Baltimore Oriole, an adult male, in there with it. So it's, you'll find multiple Orioles hanging out together often. I think a previous time in the last month when I was in there, there was a Bullock's or a female Bullock's Oriole up there. So yeah, you can see multiple Orioles. It would certainly be surprising if you saw more than one orchard Oriole, but that could also happen, just. Okay, and then I think someone else was waving a hand. Not sure if it was Rob or did anyone else have a question or a comment before we move on? All right, well, we'll keep going then. Let's see. Okay, we'll go on to this species. So again, and I'm going to pick up the pace because I want to try and get through this in a reasonable time. So here is a vocalization of this bird. This is a call, typical call from Jared Swakhamer, made this recording. And here is a recording of a longer vocalization, a song by Paul Marvin. I like how it's incorporating some imitations of other birds. Like I heard a little bit of a kestrel in there and some other stuff. So this is a male hooded Oriole. And this is our most common Oriole during the breeding season. Here is the female, looks more or less like this. I could show you photos of the immature males. They look a lot like those immature male orchard Orioles with a little bit of a black bib on an otherwise, bird that otherwise looks like this female. Although structurally a little bit longer, a little curvier beak than we saw with the orchard Oriole, and a little bit longer tail typically. Here is its range map. And you can see that, in the summertime, this is very much a bird we expect. We're in its breeding range up here. Kind of an interesting sort of, complex mosaic it has of different places, like southern part of Baja, it's there year round. But then it expands out in the breeding season. And again, in the interest of time, I'm just going to move along. And interestingly, even though it's such a common species in the breeding season, in the winter time, it's actually, I would say, one of the harder Orioles to find. Like this is, of the 5 that we're going to talk about, this is the one that I have not seen this year. And it's in some part, a measure of my year list strategizing that, well, I'm not going to invest a lot of time in chasing after a hooded Oriole now because I know I'll get tons of them in my backyard in just a few months. But if you wanted to see them, these are the places they've been reported so far this year. And I think like this is John Deacon's hummingbird feeder. It's been showing up in his personal, his backyard. These I think were also, all these 3 here were from I think at least 2 of them were from the Santa Barbara Christmas count on January 2nd, again at like personal homes. I think one of these is Noah Gaines' personal home. So people with a hummingbird feeder in the backyard that these Orioles visited, where a lot of these reports come from. And then again, if you're interested in chasing after this species, this one was out at UC Santa Barbara, kind of just east of Stork Field in a big eucalyptus. And that was more than a week ago, I think, at this point. So maybe not a high percentage place to go look for it, but you could go look there if you wanted to see it. Or you could wait a few months and they'll show up in your backyard.
John, a couple just quick notes.
Yeah.
One, telling hooded from orchard again can be really tough. Call notes good. A little chuck note there on the orchard. And one you didn't play on the recording is the wheat. Wheat. If you hear an Oriole, a yellow Oriole going wheat, wheat, then that's absolutely hooded. And you can play tape at it, where I use the word tape. I'm old fashioned, a recording at it. And if you're not sure, and sometimes get it to call back even in the wintertime, and that's really helpful. And then just one comment about hooded Orioles. They really are increasing as a winter bird in Southern California. It did used to be literally the rarest of the Orioles. Now, instead of only 1 or 2 a winter in San Diego, we're getting 5 or 6. Note that there are 4 or 5 in Santa Barbara County. They seem to be increasing, while other Orioles like bullocks seem to be decreasing. Also, they're arriving earlier in spring. It used to be not till late the first week of March. Now it's the end of February, the first adult male turns up. So hooded's showing real changes. It's not huge changes, but they're noticeable.
Yeah, and with the hoodeds in their spring migration, typically the males show up a little bit before the females, right? Like kind of like a week before or a couple of weeks before.
Right.
Cool. Well, again, I'm always run late in these meetings, but I'm more mindful than usual of the fact that I'm running late, so I want to get through these. I'm going to move on to this absolutely gorgeous photo of a gorgeous Oriole. And here's a recording by Jared Swackhammer of a typical call that it makes. And here's a song also by Jared Swackhammer. And this is the Bullock's Oriole. So this is the other, relatively common summertime species that we get. And especially so in the spring, like, I guess there's a big migration push and we get just a lot of them early in the spring. And then we get smaller numbers as some of them continue to move through and some of them stay. Would you say that's correct, Paul? Something sort of like that?
Yeah, I mean, the big push is March and April, and then they dribble and well into May, especially probably females. But certainly on the coastal plain, until you go to the interior, the true interior, far outnumbered in Santa Barbara by hooded Orioles. Yeah. Not the case in some other counties where they're a little more equal, but clearly in Santa Barbara, there are far fewer bullocks than hoodeds in the coastal plain.
Interesting. Yeah, so this is the adult male, and again, pretty distinctive head pattern. I think I talked about this. I was rewatching the Oriole and Tanager meeting we did a number of months ago, and I quoted who was it? The field guide companion, Ken Kaufman, I think, his field guide companion, and he described this as a beatnik Oriole because it has like a black beanie and a goatee and wraparound shades. I don't know. Now, since I read that, I can't not see it every time I see the male Bullock's Oriole. And then here's a female. And, there's this interesting pattern where the female has this sort of, it's yellow back here in the undertail coverts and up here on the breast and the throat. And then it's sort of pale in the middle. I've seen other Orioles that have a version of that, but it seems to be more pronounced in the female Bullock's Orioles. Again, not expert enough to make pronouncements like that, but Paul, I'm curious, is that a characteristic that would lend you to at least move in the direction of Bullocks for your ID?
Yeah, that and the gray back. The real problem, though, is very dull female Baltimore Orioles. I don't know if you have pictures. They can be unbelievably dull. and they have been misidentified as Bullock's Orioles in the East and in the West for eons. And then you have to go by things like the face pattern. It's much plainer in Baltimore versus that distinct dark eye line and supercilium of Bullock's. One other thing that's hard to see in this picture is usually the brightest yellow or the more orangey yellow in a female Bullock's is in the lower auricular, the lower cheek and the malar area, while the brightest yellow or orangey yellow in a dull female Baltimore is on the breast.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we do have some examples of female Baltimore Orioles in a minute. And there was that interval when they were lumped, right? For a while there, I lost a species in I remember as a teenager, this was upsetting to me. We just got the Northern Oriole for a while, right? And it was both Bullock's and Baltimore together. But then since then, they've been split again into separate species. Am I remembering that correctly?
yeah, they were lumped in the early 70s and then resplit again in the 90s.
Yeah. So clearly there's, they're fairly closely related. If the experts who, decide these boundaries have gone back and forth, we're talking about some pretty closely related birds. I included this photo. So this is in that big sycamore over on Santa Monica Creek that I was talking about on that bike path. And I like this photo because it shows this adult male Bullock's Oriole engaged in gaping. So this is a character, this is a behavior that Orioles and blackbirds and meadowlarks, which are all fairly closely related, have, where they can pry their beak open and use that to like investigate nooks and crannies and find insects and whatnot that they can feed on. So I thought it was cool when I was just snapping away with the motor drive on this bird. Then I realized one of the photos showed it in mid gape. So I thought that was cool. Here's its range map, the Bullock's Oriole, and kind of fix this range map in your mind, because in a second we're going to look at the Baltimore range map, and it's really interesting. They basically seems like they did just sort of divvy up North America, and the ones in this half are the Baltimore Orioles, and the ones in this half are the Bullock's Orioles. Oh, and you can also see in this range map, it's kind of cool. So again, I'm not sure the history of these range maps at all about birds.org, but they have included a little strip of what looks to me like purple, a little year-round habitat along, right along the coast of Southern California, basically from San Diego to Santa Barbara. So it's cool. And it's a detail that you don't necessarily see unless you're looking really closely at the range map. But it does seem, my impression is that the Bullock's Orioles are probably the easiest Orioles to find in the winter around here. Would you agree with that, Paul?
Yeah, clearly it's, but again, declining, but it's still the most numerous of the species.
Yeah. All right, well, here are places where you can see where Bullock's Orioles have been reported in eBird in 2021. So in Carp, this is along Carpinteria Creek, right at 6th Street. They were up in the sort of the tall trees there. There's some big sycamores and some other big trees there. And this is at Santa Monica Creek, the same place where the Orchard Oriole has been hanging out. There was a Bullock's Oriole there. These, well, I can actually click through and see where they are. Oh, so this was at the, right, so Mark Holmgren covered the Santa Barbara Municipal Golf Course right up there, just west of Las Positas for the Christmas count, and he had 2 Bullock's Orioles. And then these are, let's see, there was one in Stowe Grove Park, just on the 12th. This, I think was, yeah, Dave Compton out in Isla Vista as part of the Christmas count. And what's this? This is at Lake Los Carneros. So that's actually, there've been a number of sightings there at Lake Los Carneros. And those are probably in the, the larger trees around Stowe House, like right at that parking area where you go to Lake Los Carneros, where you park to a big old house there. Good place to look for Orioles. Okay. So on we go to this species. And the recording of its vocalizations. So this is Eric DeFonzo's recording of its call. And then here is also Eric DeFonso's recording of its song. And for me, at least that call, I would have a really hard time distinguishing that from a Bullock's Oriole. This is the Baltimore Oriole. So this is the eastern version of the Bullock's Oriole that was split when they were previously lumped as the Northern Oriole.
John, the chatter call, Baltimore averages it's slower.
Mm-hmm.
Bullock's is slower and raspier.
Okay.
You can actually tell them apart, not all the time, but a bunch of the time. So think, Bullock's slower and raspier on that chatter call.
Yeah. I need to hear a lot more examples, I think. I need to, you have, besides your other talents, you have the great virtue of having spent good quality time with both of these species, right? You grew up in New York and you were at Cape May for many years, where I assume Baltimore Oriole is a relatively easy bird in the breeding season. Yeah, Andrea, I see you have your hand up.
The beak and the feet of this one gray, whereas the other one's darker.
I would be inclined to if I don't see it called out in the field guide, I tend to attribute variations like that to just individual variations that are not really necessarily going to be helpful. Again, I would defer to Paul, but I have not heard people talk about foot color as a useful distinguishing characteristic for these birds. There is this whole journey, I think, that one goes on that I am still very much on as a bird watcher. In the beginning, I can recall, and I lapse into this sometimes, I just want to match the picture in the book. I've got the picture, I've got the bird, I find the bird that matches the picture, and I'm done. And, with experience, what I've come to realize is it's just not that simple. There's a lot of individual variation out there in the field. The field guide authors do their best to give you a representative version of that bird, but that's just one bird that they're depicting, and there's a whole population of birds, so what really helps, I think, is spending quality time with the birds in the field and getting familiar enough with them that you start to learn, oh yeah, look, this is clearly bird X, but it's got a slightly different beak, and you kind of learn what the range is that you can expect. And this is why it's so fraught when you start chasing rarities that you're not familiar with, because you're not familiar with them. So, it can be hard to know what the actual range of variation is. This is the adult male Baltimore Oriole. And here's a bunch of examples of females and immatures. One characteristic I've heard people talk about that I wanted to ask you about, Paul. So this sort of upper wing bar here in the Baltimore, at least in these examples, is relatively smooth along the upper edge, whereas in some of the Bullock's Orioles photos, it's more of a sawtooth, there's these dark intrusions into it. If I back up, maybe I can find an example that shows that. So like here, so this female Bullock, it's kind of got more of a jagged upper edge of that wing bar. Is that something that you look for or would give much weight to?
Partly. It's not foolproof. If it has a really jagged sawtooth, that's good for Bullocks. But depending on where the feathers, some Bullocks don't have a very obvious sawtooth. So then be careful, don't call it a Baltimore just because of that. Then you have to look at the brightness of the bird, or again, where's the brightest orangey yellow, see how plain faced that bird is compared to the Bullocks.
And
also that upper wing bar on Baltimore tends to be a little thicker than on a Bullock's, much thicker than the lower wing bar when they're more even on Bullocks.
Okay. Yeah, and I do see the thing that you mentioned earlier that, again, I've seen in the field guides about the strongest color on these birds being more here on the breast, whereas on the Bullocks, it's more in the cheek area. It's subtle, and obviously there's going to be variation with individual birds. All right, well, these are female and immature Baltimore Orioles. Here's its range map. And as I was saying, it's kind of a, it's like they got together in a smoke-filled room and divvied up the North American continent. Said, okay, the Baltimore Orioles, we're going to be over on the eastern part of the country, and the Bullocks are going to be in the western part. And then in the winter, they'll all kind of mingle together. Although I gather it does look like the wintering range of Baltimore goes further south into South America, whereas I think the Bullocks cut off more, in this area in Central America.
Is the geographic variation also because of different food sources? Like, does one have more, like, imagine in the South, it might have more flowering fruits all year round, and the North is more insectivores, or the Midwest is more insectivores, and the coasts are more, does it have to do with food?
It's an interesting question. I'd be interested in Paul's thoughts on that.
Oh, sorry, I missed it.
So if I can summarize, so Kay was asking, like, in between the Baltimore and the Bullocks, are there like different food preferences?
No, I think there's virtually total overlap, especially in the wintertime.
I guess they're wintering in the same
Yeah,
areas.
flowering eucalyptus, and they'll, again, regularly I'll see a Baltimore and California probing in a sycamore or a sweet gum, or as well as blooming ukes or a Cape honeysuckle hedge or a bottle brush. Same exact.
Yeah. All right, here are where Baltimore Orioles have been reported in eBird in 2021. And I will click through because I was so happy to get these photos. So Mark had one up at that same golf course, the municipal golf course on the Christmas count. And then I think this bird was also on the Christmas count. No, it was a week later, but in Hope Ranch Annex. And then these two reports, I think, are probably the same bird. So this is a bird that I saw that same day that I was with Florence Sanchez, and she actually found the, oh no, I take it back. It was the next day that Florence Sanchez found the orchard oriole. This is the day before when I saw what, after posting these photos and getting feedback, I ended up reporting as a Bullock's oriole. This was, I think the eventual consensus I heard was that at least no one disagreed loudly enough to penetrate my brain that this was a female Bullock's, presumably, or a relatively young female Bullock's oriole, maybe. That's my recollection. And then this adult male Baltimore oriole, or at least what I'm hoping is a Baltimore oriole, because it was a bird I really wanted to see. So Paul, if you want to disabuse me of this being a pure male Baltimore oriole, you can do that. I can take it, but hopefully you agree this is
from that angle. Yeah, notice the upper wing bar tinged orange. Yeah, the full. There are hybrids, as you said. They do hybridize, but it's a very narrow overlap zone in the Great Plains. I once saw an adult male hybrid on Lower Mission Creek way back in like the late 80s, early 90s. And it looked like a Baltimore Oriole, but had too much white in the wing, basically.
And that was what led you to see it had some Bullocks in it, that
Yeah.
it had that white wing panel.
Yeah, and a lot of white edging, big, broad white edgings in the big panels. Otherwise, though, interestingly, I think it had a full black head. Some of the hybrids will have an orange supercilium on an otherwise full black head. They vary from bird to bird on what these and you say, well, what about a female hybrid? Well, good luck.
Yeah.
You ever identify, you try to pigeonhole it as a Baltimore Bullock. You would never identify a female as a hybrid, probably, but an adult male you would.
Yeah, I guess that, you can study all you want and gain experience and get more fine-grained in your distinctions, but still in the field, the birds can be just, not really distinguishable. Okay. Let me see. When we come to our last species, so I just think this is a gorgeous bird. I always feel like I'm getting away with something if I get to see this this bird. So here is a recording by Richard Webster of its call. and some other background species you may be able to identify as well. So there is kind of this, this pattern. A lot of these Orioles have sort of a, kind of a chatter, kind of a chuck chuck kind of call, but they do have different flavors of it. Like this is, I can't describe it well, but listening to examples, I can recognize the distinctive characteristics of this call versus some of the other Oriole calls we've been listening to. And here is its song, also a recording by Richard Webster. And this is the male Scots Oriole. And here is a female / immature, I'm not sure. Also a Scots Oriole. Structurally, they're, even in the females and immatures, they're relatively large for Orioles compared to some of these others we've been looking at. Relatively heavy, long beak. Sometimes it's sort of subtle, but something to look for. And here is its really interesting range map. Really kind of complicated. So it's got these purple areas where it exists year round. It's really a deserty species, you can see. When it expands in the breeding season, it's basically going in these southwest deserts. Has breeding range here in California. Paul, you can probably tell me what part of the, what the actual...
That's pinyon juniper on the north flank of the San Bernardino and San Gabriel Mountains.
Awesome.
As far west as that very northeast corner of Santa Barbara County in Ballinger, Quaddle, Santa Barbara Canyons. That is the very edge of the breeding range, isolated.
Yeah, and until this year, that is the only place I'd ever seen these birds in Santa Barbara County, was making the trip up to the Cuyama Valley and the 33 and going off, into those areas east of the 33. And then there's this little isolated patch, and I'm not sure if that's the same area, if that's Santa Barbara County, or is that up?
Yeah, that's that area. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But then it has this light blue, so it's a non-breeding scarce. So there's like a wintering range where it spreads out and sort of hangs out throughout this area to some degree.
That's a little generous. They shouldn't have any color in northern Santa Barbara County, San Luis Obispo. They're exceptionally rare there, so that they should have stopped it, at Farron Road.
Yeah, I guess for a person who has spent as much time and effort, thinking through these range maps, when you say they're being generous, I take that to the bank. So here is the only place in Santa Barbara County they've been reported this year, is this one spot. And this is in fact Farron Road, which Paul was just talking about. So they are up there, and it's pretty cool. And it's, again, it's such a neat bird. I feel like it's worth my investing just a little bit in like giving some directions. Yes. If you're willing to go up there to Farron Road, I think it's worth doing. So basically, to go to Farron Road, if you haven't been there, is you take the 101 and you head up the coast, and you go through Santa Barbara, you go through Goleta, and right at the end of town, when you're just leaving the development, you go past Sandpiper Golf Course, and then there's this little turnoff here where you can get onto Calle Real, and it comes up quick, so you kind of have to be paying attention. But you get off the 101 here, and then you go along Calle Real, and you come up here and you turn onto Farron Road. And basically what Farron Road does is it winds up into these hills. And it's really interesting birding, the whole way up. There's little, oak pockets of oak forest, and there's some open grasslands, and you get up into where there's avocado orchards here on the east side of the road. It's one of the best places around here to find common ground doves. So it's worth going up there for that. But you basically get up here, and it's not obvious in this view, but there's a gate here, and that's where the public road ends. So this is as far as you can drive. But if you get up here, you can kind of park on the shoulder here, and there's some other places you can park along the shoulder. Just, look for places where it's safe and you can get off the pavement. And if you walk this little stretch of road, and it's just, it's like several hundred yards, there's this, whoops, and who knows where I've gone now. I start clicking on things and I get lost. All right, I'm gonna zoom out and see where I am. Okay, so here we are again. We are up here along this little chunk. And so you walk this stretch of road, and this is a big, tall line of eucalyptus. And there's a few eucalyptus on this side of the road as well. And this is where those, at least it's one of the places that these Scots Orioles, and it seems like there's several of them. Like I definitely saw 2 when I was there a week or 2 ago. Someone else reported, not in eBird, but I think on the SPCO birding mailing list, having 3 or more of them. And I thought, when I was there, I definitely saw 2 males at the same time and thought I was hearing a third bird calling. It was not one of those 2 males. So it's definitely worth getting up there and taking a look for them.
Hey, John.
Yeah.
What was the Oriole that was observed at Carp Creek at the feeder behind those condos at Singing Springs?
When are we talking about?
It was just last year. It had a really short tail.
Oh yeah, and there were some photos of it, I think, but they weren't really good photos. I think I ended up in my head sort of writing that off. Like I didn't know what it was, and I wasn't confident, and I did not hear a definitive pronouncement from the experts who were discussing it. So I just got, who knows what it is. Like for a while there, I had this idea, like I should really go look for that bird and try and get some better photos, and then we can maybe get a better idea. But my recollection of it is vague, for which I apologize. I don't know, Paul, do you have any recollection of a short-tailed Oriole on Carpinteria Creek a year or so ago?
No, sorry.
That's okay. This is like asking you, there was a specific drugstore where someone walked in, on the other side of town, and do you know what happened there? So, no.
Just a couple quick comments on Farron Road and the Scots. Some of these Orioles, of course, they successfully winter, so they'll come back multiple years in a row, like the Santa Monica Creek Orchard Oriole is how many years now? At least 3 or 4.
Yeah.
A lot of them don't, but they have a pretty good return rate. So especially the adult males, which suggests if you find an adult male, it could be you missed it the year before when it was a young male, and then it'll keep coming back as long as it's alive, however long that is. So some of these Orioles, a Baltimore Oriole, I think, came back 7 or 8 years in a row to Santa Barbara back in the 60s and 70s. It was the first county record. It just kept coming back year after year. Adult male Orioles in winter are the least common plumage. You get more immatures and females than you get adult males, except for Scots. It's interesting. A lot of the Scots Orioles are adult males. The former stronghold of Scots Orioles, was the foothills in Montecito, but the blue gum eucalyptus they frequented for year after year after year, birds coming back that Joan Lentz particularly was keeping track of, they either, cut them down or they died. And so now Montecito's without Scots Oriole. And the other place was up halfway up San Marcos Pass at the Trout Club. And they used to be regular there, but not recently. Scots Oriole is really interesting. It's the one species that seems to really be tied to foothill and lower mountains. You don't see Scots Orioles out on the coastal plain hardly at all like you do the other Oriole species. It seems to be a habitat difference. Farron Road, by the way, we used to go there starting in the 80s to see the grasshopper sparrows breeding there much farther back down the road toward 101. But we never went all the way up to the top here where the Scots Orioles were. It begs the question, how many years has there been a small wintering population of Scots Orioles in that line of eucalyptus, and nobody ever checked it until just recently? And so it'll be interesting to see the next few winters if they keep coming back a few birds to that site.
Yeah, and I guess it's sort of a larger version of the story that Joan tells about, the early birding in Santa Barbara of, people not real, or in Southern California, people not realizing that these desert oases or these coastal riparian habitats, would fill up with these migrants, and you'd find Eastern migrants in there because people just hadn't looked for them, or at least they weren't, people who were in a position to actually recognize some of these, sort of drab fall warblers, these sort of interesting vagrants had just not, had not looked. It's easy to overlook these things if you aren't actually looking. All right, well, I think that basically does, let's see. Oh, I actually had a couple more quick slides I wanted to show. So these were, the reason why I was so happy to finally see what I like to believe was an unambiguous Baltimore Oriole was because over the last few years, I've seen several ambiguous Orioles that I tried very hard to make into Baltimore Orioles. And this was one of them. This was Santa Monica Creek in November of 2019, that same sycamore tree. And, I circulated, these photos and inquired of the experts. And I don't remember, Paul, if you were part of that chain or not, but eventually I, came away from it with the consensus that this bird was at least ambiguous, that this was not an unambiguous Baltimore Oriole. So I did not count it as such. I entered it as, New World Oriole species, which I figured was a safe ID.
Nice.
Yeah, I'd call it a Baltimore. I mean, you can't eliminate hybrid, but notice the plain face. It doesn't have the supercilium and the dark line. It's more just a uniform. It's really orangey. The upper wing bar is really thick. The brightest orange looks like the breast. It's a young male. Notice, by the way, there is a lot of pale in that belly area. So again, be careful. So, some Baltimores have that like all bullocks, immature females have.
I'm experiencing deja vu because I think we went through all these arguments back in November of 2019. And then here is a bird in the following spring, same location. Also, I tried very hard to get some degree of confidence that I could report this as a Baltimore Oriole. But again, I ended up putting this in as New World Oriole species. And this is, doesn't show the bird as well as even those previous poor photos. So, again, when you're dealing with poor photos and it's an ambiguous situation to begin with, really it gets to the point where I think the wise course is to just back away from the identification and, put it down as New World Oriole species and hope for a better view. But that is it for the slides on our 5 Oriole species. Okay, well, I've gone long, for which I apologize. Paul, you've been very patient and thank you for sticking around. Do you have a few more minutes? If people had, more questions, we could kind of open it up to a little quick Q&A.
Oh yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so questions for Paul, people?
I sent you, John, a link. I hope you can open to.
Oh yeah, in the chat. Yeah, in the direct chat. Let me see what I can do here. All right, I'm going to open that up in my browser and take a look before I try sharing my screen. Oh yeah, so let me go ahead and share my screen and we can take a look at this Oriole. So Jenny, set up what we're about to see here.
This was in the end of September 2013. This bird showed up to our feeder and it just, something was different about it. It didn't seem like the regular hooded Orioles. It was never with the regular hooded Oriole families that we have normally during the summer. And I absolutely thought it was just another hooded Oriole, but I had some people tell me it was a probable orchard.
Yeah, I having Paul Lehman here, I wouldn't even hazard a guess since we have Paul here, but I'm curious what you would think about these photos, Paul.
Again, with the caveat that if this was still September, you have this problem of juvenile hooded Orioles. But having said that, this bird, notice, there it is in the bird bath. Go back to the bird bath picture.
Okay.
Hell, it's the size of the freaking Moonia.
A tiny bird.
Almost.
Right.
It's so tiny. Also, a lot of orchards are, although the problem with juvenile hoodeds, they have little round heads. It makes them look extra cute.
Yeah.
So small, and the yellow is pure. The only thing that goes, gives me pause is that very last picture, which is the best one of the bill. Is that horn color at the base of the bill, or has it turned gray? And that means it's older.
See the last one, the one in the bird bath, or the one
No,
that
very last photo.
let me see. So to the right. So this is the last one.
Oh, then it's not
I
that
can
one.
zoom in a
Maybe
little
it's
bit.
the other way.
At the feeder.
Yeah, but man, if I saw that, and the yellow looks nice and clear, and that one. Notice that that bill color is that a kind of a horn, which suggests a young bird, and then I get nervous about some of these juvenile hooded Orioles with the small bills. If it had a blue-gray bill, then you figure it's a little older, and then, but still, I mean, everything that the yellow's the right yellow. It's a little cute little round head, man. It's the Mooney is going to beat it up. So no, I'd lean orchard, but if you then said, it's really a juvenile hooded, I wouldn't say, no, that's not possible. And that is one of the absolute toughest IDs there is out there. Some of these juvenile hooded versus orchard through September. Usually by October, the hoodeds then start looking more obvious like hoodeds.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Other questions for Paul? Brody, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, I wanted to ask, Paul, have you ever had any pet birds?
I haven't. Well, actually, an old girlfriend did. She had a couple budgies. But otherwise, no. I travel enough, and then who takes care of the birds and stuff. So I haven't. But I know a lot of people who do, and they love them. But I haven't.
Other questions for Paul?
Thank you.
All right. Well, if there are no more questions, I will wrap up the meeting. But thank you again, Paul. It was very informative. I enjoyed it a lot. Brody, did you have something else you wanted to say?
I wanted to ask you if next meeting we could do warblers and the bird quiz.
Oh yeah, we can return to that. We've done that in the past, where we go on eBird and we do the bird quiz.
Yes.
We try and get 20 of them right, and hope we don't get a photo that's just so hard that it's just rolling the dice. Yeah, sure. I will look into that. So again, we're going back to a once a month schedule. So this would be the February meeting. I'll take a look at what to do, but certainly a warbler themed meeting would be fun to do then. And I will put an update in the blog so you can see what's coming up. Okay, last chance for any input or questions or comments.
Good job.
Again, thank you, Paul. And thank you again. I know I've said it and I don't want to be repetitive, but really what you've done, across many projects, but with Birds of Santa Barbara County in particular, has made a big difference to me in my, my enjoyment of learning more about Santa Barbara's birds and going out to some of these places I would not have otherwise visited, and just finding amazing birds that I would not have otherwise seen. So thank you very much for that. Okay, everybody. Well, thanks, and I will see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, thanks, Ellen. Thanks, Paul.
Thank